we say, when people, they ask us and they say, well, who are you? And then we, you know, they always want to know who we are, and they always say, well, what's the name of your tribe? And that's when they always ask that. And I always tell them, I said, well, I'm Lakota, but I'm only Lakota because that's the language that my people speak.
I call myself the Lakota Singers because we sing all those old songs. We sing appropriate songs. Anybody has a Lakota, Dakota, Nakota name, we will pick a song that has all the words for it, and I wind up explaining that song to everybody because nobody knows our language anymore. If I go to South Dakota, when we sing an honoring song, I don't have to explain it. But when I come to the Twin Cities, I have to explain everything. That's why as a secondary cultural teacher of the St. Paul school system, it seems like the longer I stay there, the longer people don't know anything. So the kids are cool because the parents are not teaching their kids anything that's cultural. You have the complete sweep of the Western movement, and the English way of life is completely overpowering our American Indian history and culture.
And growing up in Arizona, my grandmother, she spoke Yoeme and Spanish. And I would try to talk to her in English. And I guess one dominant language was enough for her, so Spanish.
Music has changed since like the 60s, 70s, and 80s because now it's like a more contemporary. As before, there used to be a lot of words in songs, like traditional songs. There used to be mostly all words in songs, and now, as the songs, the drum groups got younger and younger. Well, they make them more just like a vocables. That's it. That they sing, because it's easy to make songs like that. You know, I mean, anybody could do that. You know, you could just hum a tune and say, hey, you know, I made a song. You know, but when you're putting words in songs, it's a little bit more complicated because you got to talk to elders that know the language. You got to know how to put a song into its right way to go, and because a lot of the words are pronounced backwards, like, you know, and like well, I don't know how to explain it, but you know, it's not like English words. You know, Indian words, when you use them, some words you have to put before and it means after, but the word comes before.
And part of the reason why they wanted me is because they wanted me to understand, because, see, the English language is the only language in the world that's backwards. It's a backwards language. And it's also, too, the only language in the world that has, you know, terminology and words. That's like in the Lakota language. We don't have a word for love. And everybody says, well, that's kind of messed up, that a culture doesn't have a word for love. But I said, you have to look at the wisdom of the people, because in God's world, you know, if you have daytime, you also have nighttime. So you have, they're synonymous. Day and night are synonymous. So if you have a word for love, you must also create a word for the opposite, which is hate. So they didn't create a word for love because they didn't want to create a word for hate. But love is an action word, and it's an emotion. So how did you tell somebody that you loved them? You know, you, by action. If you wanted to tell your grandma that you loved her, you would go and give your grandma a hug, kiss her on the cheek, look at her in the eyes. And you know, she knew. You know, it's an action word. So to say it, you know, we didn't have a word to say it. So, you know, that's one of the things that, you know, I tell people, you know, that's important, that language is important. When they were...
My mother spoke. I didn't know that until after she was gone. No, that's not true. I did find out one time, but I never pursued it because they wouldn't talk. She wouldn't talk about it. We was doing a powwow on 104, and some Navajo people were there. My mother's the name. Navajo people were there, and they were having a problem. When my mom started talking to them, and it just shocked me, you know. But that was all. She would never teach me. You didn't talk about it. You didn't do things. Everything, you know, you did was like secret. Or you didn't just let it go.
Journey.
Just let it go.
You know, when I was a young boy back in Wakwala, and I would talk Indian because my grandma would talk Indian. I would, say some words, talk with her. And it was my parents that said, no, don't do this. And they said, learn the English, learn to talk like the Washichus. It's important. This is important. Do this, son, because it's going to be important someday. So I talked English. Didn't learn the Lakota language. I know some words. My mom would talk Lakota to me, but I would always answer in English. So to speak Lakota, I can't do that. Not fluently, but do I understand? But I don't speak it.
Playing outside on the farm there. But my great-grandmother, she passed away 20 years later, but she refused to speak English. She doesn't speak Salagi, Cherokee. And we couldn't visit her, and I wish I'd spend more time and learn more of the language. But then again, I was little guys out there playing around with the kids. We didn't get a chance to do that.
That happened was that we used to go to church a lot, and I really thought we were Christian. I didn't know, I thought that's what Grandma was, so that's what I'd become. But I learned later from my grandmother that she was in a Pentecostal church because in a Pentecostal church they learned to talk in tongues, and that was like a sign from God or something. Well, there were a lot of Indian people that went to that church, and they talked in tongues in their own language to communicate back and forth. And I thought that was really unique until I started working on my master's and, went into some of the archives in the Smithsonian and found out that a lot of Native people went to Pentecostal or Baptist churches that practiced, speaking in tongues. And so that was really unique to see that that was kind of a sham in my life.
There are many here that understand and know these traditions and are able to speak the language. There are some here that understand their traditions and may not be able to speak the language. And there are those of us here that we know that this is where we belong. But through no fault of our own, as with many nations, we don't know the language. The language to us is lost.
The language was lost. There was a lady in Oklahoma. She was the last person I knew that really spoke it fluently. And you got two different dialects of it. You got like a Unami and a Muncie. And they're both the same people, but it's like a north and south. Like northern speak, and southern's got, okay, same thing basically. But we was lucky enough to get some of her tapes on the language before she died, so we do have them. I'm trying to, you could probably find them out here yet today at the powwows. They do have their language tapes some places. And a lot of the Lenape people in Ohio's lost it. I can't speak the language. I've learned some of it. My wife, she does a lot better than I do because she's got her own library at home. We have more books than you can see out here to buy today, which is good because if people have questions, like anything else.
That's just like even some of these young guys that sing on a drum. They sing those songs, and you sing, what does that song mean? And a lot of them don't know. It's only because they learned the song off of a tape, and they say, It's a song that they heard it and they liked the way it sounds good, and it was a song that they could learn. So they learned the song listening to the tape, not knowing what the words mean, not knowing the language. And so, the significance, the meaning is being lost. And in the sense that even how, our language, that's just like even now, you ask people, and even when I go home to the reservation, I say, talk to people, and I say, well, what does that mean? And, and then they'll give me a definition. I say, well, but what is the Lakota meaning? And they'll look at me and they'll say, well, what are you talking about? And I say, well, I want to know, the history of it, where that name came from.
And I had to remember, as soon as they sang the song, I got up and I wrote it on a paper. I put it on the tape so I won't forget. So there was always a tape recorder right there, and and then while it's fresh there, and then I had to figure out what the words were, I mean, I spoke my language, but being away from it for a while, nobody to talk fluently with, it kind of gets lost.
I hear these things, I talk to people, and it saddens me that so much is getting lost. And when I say that it's getting lost, is because it's being defined in a different way. That's important, that language is important. When they were wanting to, the linguistic and the anthropologists were wanting to translate the Bible into the Lakota language, I said that's impossible. Because in the Lakota language we don't have a word for love, nor do we have a word for hate, nor do we have a word for evil. We don't have a word for the devil or Satan, nor do we have the concept of sin. So when you take just those 7 words, you wipe out a big portion of the Bible. So, but now what they did is they said, well, you can create a word. So those words were created. We say, what is it they say now, what is it, I can't think of the words. Can't think of the words that they use. But those words are now created. So now they're a part of the language. So now the devil is now a part of the Lakota culture.